Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Grace Simpkins and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, which is spread across the country. And I'm going to show myself again. There I am talking to you. So I am welcoming you from two groups. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by Woods Hole Sea Grant, where I work, which is located at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution here on Cape Cod. To find out more about future webinars, you can look under the Woods Hole Sea Grant Education tab on our website or simply follow us on Facebook. This is, believe it or not, the 19th webinar in a series designed to help you get to know NOAA and some of our incredible experts during these months of school closures. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to John Cangialosi from the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. While we'll be talking about NOAA's role in hurricane prediction and safety, we want to recognize that we are coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. We acknowledge that John is coming to us from the land of the Seminole and Tequesta nations. We are hosting this webinar from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gay-Head-Aquina. A few guidelines before I hand it over to the speaker. You're all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure that everyone can hear our speaker. However, there's a box where you can write questions. If you've been on before, you know that as the moderator, I'll be keeping track of questions for John, and he will stop every now and then to answer a few. We may not get to all of your questions, but he will answer as many as he can during the webinar. I appreciate your patience, and John, I am going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Grace, and good morning, everybody. I really appreciate you joining me today. I'm really excited to teach you about hurricanes and hopefully get you prepared for hurricane season. Hopefully everyone's excited to learn a little bit about hurricanes and weather today. Now, before we start talking specifically about hurricanes, I want to remind you what a meteorologist is and what we do. Now, a meteorologist, hopefully you know, is someone who studies or forecasts the weather for their job. Now, when you think of a meteorologist, it could be someone on television telling you what the weather's going to be like today, or it could be a forecaster like myself at the National Hurricane Center or National Weather Service, or someone who works for a cruise company or an airline to make sure everyone stays safe. The bottom line for everyone listening, if you have a fascination about the weather, and you have really good math and science skills, I think you have what it takes to be a future meteorologist. So please keep that in mind. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my job at the National Hurricane Center. First, let me say greetings from Miami, Florida. That's where the National Hurricane Center is located. And Grace, I don't know if anyone listening is from Florida today, but if you are, I'm from your state. So hello from the bottom of the state in Miami. Now, I wish I could be at the center today, showing you around. Maybe one day we can do that in the future when everything starts to get better. But for now, I want to show you some pictures of the outside and later of the inside of the building. Here's a couple of pictures of the outside of the building first. And when you see these pictures, you might be saying, John, that's not a very pretty looking building. And I would agree, it isn't. But the building is very, very strong. It's made of concrete and steel, and it's designed that way so we can stay safely working in that building, even if a big hurricane strikes South Florida where we all live. Now, at the National Hurricane Center, we have a really big job. We forecast tropical storms and hurricanes over a really large area, generally from Africa all the way west across the Atlantic Ocean, and then into the Pacific Ocean to pretty close to Hawaii. So it's really never a quiet day during hurricane season at the center. Now, in addition to forecasting hurricanes, we have another important job. We tell boaters, big ships, and other people who spend time on the ocean what the weather's going to be like. So if you ever go on a cruise, or you like to go offshore fishing, or you know someone that works on a boat or an oil rig, for example, we want to make sure everyone there is safe too. So we give them weather information, and we really want to tell them how strong the winds are going to be and how high the waves are going to be. Now, I want to get into hurricane science a little and talk about the parts of a hurricane. take a look at this satellite animation, or what a hurricane looks like from space. And Grace, I want you to ask a question for me for the kids. When you look at this animation right here, what catches your eye? Let's see
All
what the
right.
kids have to do.
That's a great question, John. So I think what he wants everyone to sort of weigh in with on that question box is, what do you observe, right? As scientists, we make observations. So I see that Ellie says she sees rings on the ocean. And James says that he sees the eye of the hurricane. Riley, or maybe Elizabeth, says a gray hole. Riley sees some yellow dots. A bunch of people are saying the center or the eye. Duncan says that it looks like it dips down in the middle. And a lot of folks are saying, yeah, an eye or a hole. And it looks like winds are moving the clouds. And I'll leave it at that, John.
That's great. That's great, Grace. And yeah, that's what I thought most of you would say. I thought most of you would say the eye of the hurricane, which is this big hole, as some of you put it, right in the middle. Now, the eye of the hurricane is a weird place, because you notice the hole, right? The hole means it's actually calm and even sunny in the eye. And you might be saying, how could it be nice weather in the middle of a hurricane? That's what makes hurricane science so amazing, because right outside of the eye, in this region here that I'm circling now, where the clouds get kind of white, is called the eye wall. And the eye wall of the hurricane is the worst place to be, where the winds are the strongest, the rain is often the heaviest, and unfortunately, where the damage from the hurricane tends to be the worst. Beyond the eye wall, in this zone out here, and I'll loop it again for everybody, out here are the rain bands. And the rain bands can have really gusty winds and even tornadoes inside of those bands. And I want you to take just a big look, just sort of step back and take a big look at this. Isn't the hurricane almost beautiful? Almost amazing? Mother Nature produces some amazing things, but you certainly can't call hurricanes amazing if one strikes your area. And I noticed someone did say they saw these yellow dots. Those yellow dots are observations. Those are either airports, or in this case, a buoy, or other observing weather sites where people live and we take weather information. It's how we know how bad the storm is when it affects one of those locations. Now, you might know that we give hurricanes names. It's how we help communicate about these weather systems, but we also assign them or give them groups. Now, decades ago, there were these two men you see here that worked together to design a scale. Herb Saffer was an engineer, and Robert Simpson, a meteorologist, that worked together on hurricanes. And what they did was build this very simple scale that we still use today. The scale is only based upon the strength of the hurricane's winds. It doesn't cover any other hazards that we're going to talk about when it comes to hurricanes. But no, when we give it a category 1 and we say there's a category 1 hurricane, that means the winds are between 74 and 95 miles an hour. As the categories go up, as you see here, the winds get stronger. And by the time you get to a category 5, the winds are incredibly powerful, where the winds are at least 157 miles per hour. I also want you to notice a second category that we give them. When storms reach category 3, 4, or 5, we call them major hurricanes. And these major hurricanes are the most damaging, most destructive, and the ones we worry the most about. Now, on this map here, I want to show you where those major hurricanes go. Each one of the lines you see here on the screen indicate the path of a major hurricane. Remember, category 3 or higher. Where the lines turn yellow indicates where the storms were when they were at their strongest. So let's analyze together where these storms go. You'll notice, if you look at the yellow lines first, that they get mostly grouped together and crisscross all across the Gulf of Mexico, across, unfortunately, where I live in Florida, and then across the Bahamas and over a large portion of the Western Atlantic. That zone right here that I'm circling right now, that I just talked about, that is called Hurricane Alley. So if you live in that area, I want you to be super ready for hurricane season. But let's say you don't live in that area. Let's say you live somewhere along the East Coast of the United States, or along the Gulf Coast of the United States, or even somewhere in the middle of the country. Or if you know someone that lives across the Caribbean, or guess what, even Canada, you could still see hurricanes. The bottom line is, if the water's warm somewhere near your coastline, generally around 80 degrees, then hurricanes can make their way close to where you live. Now, I think coming up next, we have a question for everybody. So Grace, get ready to take the kids' answers. Here's your first hurricane quiz. Are you ready? Let's test your knowledge. When is the Atlantic hurricane season? Do you think the right answer is A, May through November, B, December through April, C, June through November, or do you think the answer is D, hurricane season is all year long?
Okay, John, so we've got a lot of people weighing in, and I have to say there are a few folks for each one. So, for example, Taylor and I think Laura both think that it's May through November. And for B, we have Anne thinks that maybe it's December through April. And we have some folks that are weighing in at D, but overwhelmingly, I have to say the majority of the people, James, Isabella, Aiden, Rachel, Porter, they all think that it's C, June through November.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Grace. Well, the correct answer seems to lie with the majority. It is C, June through November. So if that's what you picked, congratulations. That is the right answer. But for those of you that picked May through November, that's pretty close. And lots of times we do see some storms form in the month of May. Now, I have to say something, Grace. Even though hurricane season is half the year, June through November, if we look back in history, there's actually been a tropical storm or hurricane in every single month of the year. You got to get ready for the season, but sometimes Mother Nature throws us a little curveball. Now, here's what it looks like when the season gets really busy. This is a satellite picture across the entire Atlantic Ocean. Now, when you look at this picture here, this was from the month of September in 2018. Now, at this one point in time, we had 5 systems that we were watching across the basin, and all of these affected some areas. I want to take you through it. The big one was this one here, which was Hurricane Florence. That was a Category 4 hurricane that went on to strike South and North Carolina. Then we had this one in the middle of the Atlantic. That was a tropical storm by the name of Isaac that went on to affect a large portion of the Caribbean, including the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Then we had this one behind it. This was Hurricane Helene. That was a Category 2 hurricane that recurved out here in the Eastern Atlantic, but affected areas in Europe like Portugal. Then we had another storm right off the coast of Africa that went on to become Tropical Storm Joyce. And yet another over here in the Gulf of Mexico that affected Texas and Louisiana. And when I see pictures like this, I say, oh boy, hurricane season is coming, and I know how busy it can be. Now, even though a lot of you got it right, and you knew hurricane season was June 1st to November 30th, I want to remind everybody that there's a certain time of year within that hurricane season that it gets really busy. Now, take a look at this campfire looking graphic with me. Whether you look at the yellow area, which is hurricanes alone, or the red, which is hurricanes and tropical storms together, you basically get the same answer. That the peak in the season, or when we typically see the most hurricanes, occurs right here around September 10th. And the bottom line, everybody, is the season gets the busiest late in the summer and early in the fall, generally in the months of August, September, and October. And that's because that's when the waters tend to be the warmest. All right, I got another question for everybody. So get your thinking caps on and let's see how you do this time. Here is your second quiz. What are the primary hurricane hazards? And what I mean by hazards are the bad weather conditions. Do you think the answer is A, high winds, B, storm surge, which we're going to talk about, C, heavy rainfall, D, dangerous surf, or do you think it's E, all of those?
All right, thanks for asking that question, John. And I'm going to give you the answer. And then after, I'm going to just ask if I have a bunch of questions I've been saving up for you, if you wouldn't mind stopping to take a few questions.
Sure.
So I see that Zayden is saying that they think it's C. Catherine thinks it's high winds. Dylan thinks that it's high winds. And so there are a couple of mixed, but overwhelmingly, Lillian, Isabella, Victoria, Cassidy, Zachary, they all think that it's E, all of the above: high winds, storm surge, heavy rainfall, and dangerous surf.
This is awesome, Grace. Again, I think we're 2 for 2 with the majority. The correct answer is E, all of the above. And the bottom line is, whatever answer you picked here, you really weren't wrong. They're all very dangerous hazards that come with hurricanes. So Grace, before moving on, maybe we can take some of the questions that the students are asking.
Great. And I got to tell you, we have a pretty savvy crew here. So I am not surprised, John, to see that they're getting some of those questions. All right. So some of the questions that have come in, and if you wouldn't mind hiding your slides just for while we do this Q&A. So Alicia was asking, do you have robots that go to view the hurricanes? I'm not sure if she's thinking drones or what, but are there things that you send into the hurricanes?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. There actually are. So NOAA and NASA have worked together to make a drone called the Global Hawk. And this instrument, it's kind of like a really big remote controlled airplane or a drone that we can fly right into hurricanes. It flies really high at about 60,000 feet, and it can stay up for several hours, and it can drop instruments into the hurricane. The problem we have is that the instrument's still kind of a work in progress. It's not something we do all the time, and it's pretty expensive. But I would say in 10 years or 20 years, maybe when some of you guys are meteorologists, that will become a pretty normal practice. So that's something we're looking at and something we're really just beginning. So great question.
Great. Now we have a question from James. I think he was inspired by that image you showed us with all of the different hurricanes. And he's asking, what was the highest number of hurricanes recorded in 1 year that we've ever, while we've been recording hurricanes?
Sure. It was actually fairly recently, Grace. It was in the year 2005 when we had 28 in 1 year. Now, it wasn't 28 hurricanes, but it was 28 of those named storms, of tropical storms and hurricanes together. In that 1 year, you know how we give hurricanes names? It goes through the whole alphabet. It doesn't go all the way to Z. It only goes all the way to about X and Y and things like that. But we actually ran out of letters. So we had to go to the Greek alphabet, which comes only in those really crazy years where we run out of letters to use in the normal alphabet. That year was crazy. If you want me to remind you what hurricanes happened that year, it was hurricanes like Katrina, one that was really famous. I know many of you were probably maybe not quite born yet at that year, but if you lived along the Gulf Coast, that was a crazy busy year. And that was the busiest that I've ever seen in my career, and the busiest since 1933. So it's tied. 2005 and 1933 are tied for the record.
So I think we've had this question before, but I'm just going to share it with you because there seem to be a couple of, so Duncan is asking this, and Alicia, what is the biggest or the storm that's done the most damage that you can think of?
Sure. So great question to both of them, Duncan and Alyssa. So the one that's caused the most damage in the United States, there's two that are tied. So one of them actually occurred pretty recently. It was Hurricane Harvey, just in 2017. So if anybody's listening from Texas, that was a storm that really affected your area. It resulted in $125 billion of damage just from that one hurricane. And mostly that was from the heavy rains. It's tied with the other hurricane that I just mentioned, Katrina, in 2005, that produced a massive storm surge and affected the city of New Orleans so greatly. So in the United States history, it's tied for those two, but that wasn't the deadliest hurricane. The deadliest hurricane also occurred in the state of Texas in the year 1900, and that storm killed 8,000 people, and they all drowned of those 8,000 people. Fortunately, we've got a lot better about hurricane forecasting since 1900, so we hope to never have a loss of life like that again.
Great. Okay, I have one more question for you before I have you move on. And for those of you that are asking about storm surge and some of the other things John talked about, he is getting to that. That's why I haven't been asking your questions. But the question that I like to ask, so I'm glad that one of our regulars asked it, is what is your favorite part of your job? So Jennifer was asking, what's the favorite part of your job?
Thank you for that question, Jennifer. It's a great question. And it's a hard question. So my job's I have two separate jobs. So during the hurricane season, which you know is June to November now, I am a forecaster. I always look at the weather across the tropics every day and try to predict hurricanes. And while I really, really like that, then this time of year, which is almost ending, so through the winter and fall, basically through the winter and spring rather, I'm mostly a teacher. I teach about hurricanes. I do hurricane research. And you know what's crazy, Jennifer? I don't know which one I like better because I just do them. I love them both. So it's really hard for me to pick. But I think if I had to pick one, I think there's nothing more exciting than forecasting hurricanes during the hurricane season. So I have to pick that. I feel like I get a chance to help people the most during that time of year.
Great. Well, thanks for answering our questions, and we'll let you move on, but I'll be keeping track. If you have questions that come up, write them and I'll save them for John.
Sure. All right, well, hopefully everybody can see my screen again, so we're going to get back into the presentation. Now, I did mention that there's so many hazards when it comes to hurricanes. So how are you going to remember all of these hazards? Well, we came up with a word for you to remember them, an easy way to remember them, and we call this word SWIFT. Each letter stands for something different. Where the S in the word SWIFT stands for storm surge. Now, storm surge I'm going to talk to you about, but for now, just know this. That's when the water from the ocean gets pushed by the hurricane's winds inland to where we all live and causes a tremendous amount of flooding in certain cases. The W in this word SWIFT stands for wind. You all know it's windy in hurricanes. I'm sure that's no surprise. The I and the F stands for inland flooding, which could be a really big deal in some cases. And then the T stands for tornadoes, which, as I mentioned earlier, could be a big problem in some of the rain bands and hurricanes. And I'll show you more about that coming up. Now, one more hazard I don't want you to forget about, especially if you live near the beaches, are the waves and rip currents. You know, sometimes it could be a beautiful day outside, sunny, not much wind, and you'll say, oh, it's a great day to go to the beach. It may be a great day to go to the beach, but it may be a very dangerous day to go in the ocean. And that's because a hurricane could be somewhere offshore producing really big waves and really rough conditions and surf. So make sure to always pay attention to the flags on the beaches and your local meteorologist for more information. All right, Grace, let's do another quiz. Now, this, I think, is a tough one, so I want to wish you luck. Here's your quiz. Which hurricane hazard that we just talked about in that word SWIFT has caused the most deaths, unfortunately, in the United States, where a lot of us live? Is it A, wind, B, storm surge, C, flooding from the heavy rains, or is it D, tornadoes?
All right, this is a great question. I have to say that there is a lot of well, there are a lot of different answers. So it seems like most folks are split between B, storm surge, and C, flooding. There are a few for tornadoes and winds, but I would say overwhelmingly it's sort of 50-50 between flooding and storm surge.
All right, thank you, Grace. Well, I'm going to reveal the right answer. The right answer looks like it was with the majority, and it is B, storm surge. Way to go. And you know what? Those of you that chose flooding from rain, that was the second best answer. Now, you guys did better than most people. When I actually give this information to adults, most people say wind. And that's what most people think about. I typically ask people to close their eyes and think of a hurricane. And what most people say is when I closed my eyes, what I thought of was I saw the wind. I saw the wind knocking down a building. I saw the wind blowing down trees or blowing off a roof. It's what most people think about. But in reality, what we want people to think about is what you all said. We want people to think about the water. That's what most people should be thinking about. And you guys are already steps ahead, probably because you've been listening to all these NOAA webinars that you're really, really savvy and smart now. Now, water is the big problem when it comes to hurricanes. Take a look at these pictures with me. All this flooding here was from heavy rains in Texas from Hurricane Harvey that I mentioned earlier. The one over here to the right was very close to where I live in South Florida. This was in Fort Lauderdale, and this is not from rain. This is from storm surge coming in off of the ocean. And this one over here on the bottom left is also from storm surge in North Carolina. So let's talk about the big problem. Next time you think of hurricane, I want you to think just like you're thinking now. I want you to think about the water, specifically storm surge and rain. A recent study we did at the Hurricane Center noticed that over a 50-year period, 49% of the way people unfortunately lost their lives in hurricanes drowned in the storm surge flooding. Another big portion, 27%, drowned in the flooding rains. And in fact, if you add up all of the water-related hazards, from storm surge to rainfall to surf or the big waves along the beaches, and to people who lost their lives on boats, you get 90%. Yeah, 9 out of 10 of the way people unfortunately lost their lives in hurricanes drowned. So the next time you think hurricane, remember, it's all about the water. If you ever have to evacuate for hurricanes or you hear about evacuations, it is not about the wind or the category. It is all about where we think the flooding could be. All right, speaking of flooding, I want you to do an exercise with me. I don't know if anyone today is listening from New York, or maybe some of you have visited New York. Now, here's a street corner. It's pretty close to where I grew up. I grew up in New York City. Here's a street corner in the East Village of Manhattan. And I want you to study the picture really closely for me. This is what this corner looks like on just a regular day. I want you to notice this restaurant or cafe down here. I want you to watch the building above it and around it. And I want you to look across the street and see where the cars are parked. All right, I'm going to show you the next slide. And then I'm going to ask you what you've observed. Are you ready? Here is what it looked like in that same street corner when Hurricane Sandy was in town, which was a Category 1 hurricane. All right, Grace, let's see what the kids have to say and what they've noticed.
Okay, so that's a great question. So what do you observe? What differences do you see between the photo that's up right now and the first one that we saw? So Riley says that the cars are swamped. Aiden says lots of water. Isabella and is saying that there is just lots of flooding. James says huge flood. Yeah, some folks are noticing that it's darker. Quinn is saying there are no people there. Cars are underwater is what Kyle is saying. Ellie's seeing that the traffic lights look like maybe they've been turned as well. And it looks like to Kyle there's no power. You can't see any lights on, or it doesn't look like anyone has power.
Wow, these are great observations, and they're all correct. The big one I want to point out is the one that I think the majority came up with is just the flooding. Now, the flooding here is not from rain. Sandy actually did not produce much rain in New York. All of the flooding that you see here is from storm surge. This is the water that was in the rivers in New York and in the nearby ocean that got rushed and flooded into the city. So what you can see, and what many have noticed, you can see if you look at that restaurant, the water's actually starting to come into the restaurant and the whole first floor of the building. As some pointed out, this is a police car here, where the water was about halfway up that police car and about a third of the way up the van. And another thing, take a close look at the water. Do you see all this sort of things floating in it, kind of look greenish? That's all sewage. That's all dirty water coming in off the New York very busy waterways. And I don't know if any of you have been to New York or live in New York. You know the subways are underground there. So all of this water flooded underground as well. This was a terrible situation in New York, and all associated with storm surge. So hopefully you can appreciate how damaging and unfortunately how deadly this hazard could be. And Hurricane Sandy, from all of this storm surge flooding, caused $75 million in damage. All right, let's do another exercise. Now we're going to switch from storm surge and now talk about just really flooding heavy rains. Now, the picture you see here is in Houston, Texas, and I want you to keep your eyes on the middle of the screen here. This is a big highway, as you see. This is Interstate 10 that runs through that part of Texas. Now, I also want you to notice the bridge here and the two roads that surround the highway. All right, I'm going to turn the slide, and I want to show you what it looked like when Tropical Storm Allison, not even a hurricane, something weaker than a hurricane, sat over Texas for about a week. Take a look. Now, Grace, let's ask them what they've noticed here.
Okay, folks, so what do you observe? So this is the same place that John just showed us after tropical storm. Isabella says flooding. Kyle says, is that I-10 underwater? Riley says it looks like a river and not a highway anymore. Daniel says it's flooded. Lillian notices that there appear to be things in the water as well. Ellie says all the trucks are underwater, and Taylor also, all the trucks are underwater, and that Zachary's noticing the water level is actually really close to that overpass or the bridge that you can see. And some folks think it looks like there are a lot of semi trucks in there. So flooding seems to be the theme here.
This is all correct, and a very detailed analysis from everybody listening. Yeah, that is Interstate 10 underwater. Underwater. You can see the highway was a little lower than the surrounding roads and very close to the bottom of the overpass here. Those are semi-trucks floating around, and this was a terrible situation in Houston because of the flooding event. And guess what? As I mentioned earlier, this wasn't even a hurricane. This was a tropical storm that brought 30 inches of rain in about a week. And if you live in Texas, you can take a lot of rain in Texas, but that's 6 months worth of your rain that happened in just 1 week. So hopefully you can see why flooding can be such a big deal in hurricanes. All right, let's move on to the next hazard, tornadoes and waterspouts. Now, a lot of people think these things are cool, and I've seen a whole bunch of them living here in South Florida, which happens a lot, especially the waterspouts. Now, you might be wondering how tornadoes or waterspouts form and what they specifically are. So tornadoes happen, and waterspouts, they're basically the same thing. They happen when the wind down at the surface, where we all are, is moving in one direction, and the winds in the clouds are moving at a different direction. So you get these opposing winds like that, that helps to produce a funnel like you see in all of these pictures here. Now, a tornado are these funnels that happened over land, and a waterspout is the same thing, but it happens over the water that you see here. Now, what happens if you have a waterspout form like this one, and then that waterspout moves across the beach and onto land? Well, then you just have a waterspout that becomes a tornado. The bottom line is they're the same thing. They just form over different areas. Now, in a hurricane, you can get 100 or more tornadoes form, and most of them form in the hurricane's rain bands to the right or the east of where the eye is. So if you ever get affected by a hurricane, this is just another hazard that we want you to be ready for. And these can produce a lot of local strong wind damage. So next, I want to talk about how we predict the weather and track hurricanes. We make use of a whole different source of information, including surface observations from land stations, from ships out sea, and from buoys over the oceans. Since most of the weather happens up in the sky, we launch upper air balloons or weather balloons to actually get information in the clouds, and even fly airplanes into hurricanes. We make use of satellites, like I showed you earlier in the picture down here in the bottom left. We use Doppler weather radars, like the picture you see here on the bottom right, that tells us where the rain and even the thunderstorms could be. And to predict the future weather, we use computer models to help figure out what's going to happen. Now, I think the coolest of these observations are the hurricane hunters. And I know if you've been watching these webinars, you actually got to see a good friend of mine, Jason, who talked to you about his job as a hurricane hunter. Now, I'll tell you, I only got to fly into a hurricane one time, and I didn't really like it. But then again, I don't really like roller coasters. But if you're out there and you love roller coasters and you love weather, then a hurricane hunter could be the position for you. NOAA, the agency that I work for, and others, fly these two planes up here. The Gulfstream 4, which flies around hurricanes and above them, and the P3, which flies right through the hurricane. Also, the Air Force, the picture down here on the bottom, also flies through hurricanes, and they have 10 of these planes called the C-130J that flies right through hurricanes. And the picture you see here on the right shows you the view inside of the eye of a hurricane. I told you it could be sunny in the eye. You can see that here. And from the plane, if you look down, you can actually see the ocean. And if you looked all around you, you would see this big wall of clouds that look really scary and very high. That's the eye wall. Again, the worst place to be. Now I want to show you what it looks like inside the hurricane center. Now, after we make our forecast, we want to tell people about it through television, radio, newspapers, or social media. These are some previous directors that have worked at the National Hurricane Center, and you can see how busy it gets with all these cameras and news crews that is recording us, and we have to tell them what we think is going to happen with the storm. If you ever see me and you see the Hurricane Center on television, I'll be right back here near this blue wall doing the forecast. So keep an eye out and I'll make sure to wave to the camera. And since hurricane season is coming, it's only about 3 weeks away, everybody. I want everyone to start to get ready for hurricane season. And we have Hurricane Preparedness Week coming up this week and next week. So I want you to do everything you can to get ready. Take a look at the website down here at the bottom to see what you can do, and discover whether you live in a hurricane evacuation zone or other ways you can make your house stronger, or what supplies you need to get ready for hurricanes. And I want to leave you with some more websites for information as well. These two websites you see here from the Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service is where you can get the latest weather information for your area and from the National Hurricane Center. And I know Grace also has some additional resources for you guys to learn more about hurricanes. So with that, Grace, I'd be happy to take questions for the remainder of the time.
Great, John, if you wouldn't mind minimizing your slides. And I will just tell everyone before I share, I do have a variety of questions to share with you. That those websites that John had up are also listed on the NOAA Live website. I know you may not have had a pencil and paper with you, but all of those links are there. So hurricane preparedness is there, the National Weather Service, as well as the National Hurricane Center. You can go and find those links and go directly to their website. I'm right from the website where you registered for this webinar. So don't worry if you didn't get that written down. Now, I do have a variety of questions for you, John, so I hope you're ready. So a couple of things about when you were talking about the hazards. So Ellie was asking, does the water from the waterspout ever come on land? And sort of a link to that is asking about the tornadoes. Do you follow the tornadoes, or is there like a separate tornado chasing group?
Okay, two great questions. So I'll start with Ellie's. So the waterspouts, yes, they do have water in them. You can imagine that funnel, right? It goes from the clouds all the way to the ocean surface or the lake surface, whatever it is. And it does draw water up in it. And that water does affect the area where it goes. So, but it doesn't have a lot of water. It doesn't act like a storm surge. It just acts more like a rain shower or something like that. The big problem with the waterspouts is really just the winds. Now, your other question that came in is, do we track the tornadoes at the Hurricane Center? We don't. So the great thing about the National Weather Service and NOAA in general is we have a lot of expertise in specific areas. So here's how it works. At the National Hurricane Center, our job is to do the hurricane. Then if we think there's going to be tornadoes, we reach out to the Storm Prediction Center, which is located in Oklahoma, and they're the experts in tornadoes. So then they help advise us about where the tornadoes could occur. When the tornadoes are actually happening, then there's a whole bunch of local weather forecast offices for different areas of the country that will forecast the tornadoes about in your specific neighborhoods. So it's almost like a three-step process, from the Hurricane Center to the Storm Prediction Center and then to the local forecast offices.
Great. And I should say that on May 15th, we are going to have a NOAA Live webinar from one of our tornado experts. So you'll get to hear all about tornadoes and that group on May 15th if you sit in on our webinar. So we've had quite a few questions come in about the rain and what comes first. So we had from Anne, does it always rain during a hurricane? And then Nora asked, does the wind come first? Does the rain come first? Do they come at the same time? So I thought you might talk about that quickly.
Sure, Anne, great question. Does it always rain in hurricanes? Yes, always. But the amount varies greatly. In some hurricanes that are small and fast moving, we could just get an inch or two of rain. No big deal, no floods. But in hurricanes that are big and move slow, you can get 5 feet of rain. Hurricanes are usually very wet, but the amount depends upon its size and its speed. And the second question from Nora was also, Grace, remind me of Nora's question one more time. It was...
So Nora's question was, does the wind come first most of the time, or the rain, or do they tend to come at the same time?
Yeah, so Nora, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a question we typically get from people who are very, very experienced. It always varies, unfortunately. Most times what happens is the rain gets there before the wind, but not always. If you live near the coast, what typically gets there first is the waves and the storm surge. So it really depends where you live. But if I had to give a general idea, usually the rain gets there before the wind.
And Sophia's asked this, and I know we heard about this, I think, in one of our previous hurricane talks, but I would love to hear it again. Why are hurricanes named after people?
Okay, great question. So, this all started from the Navy in the 1940s when they observed these storms and started naming them after their girlfriends and wives. And it started to catch on as like, this is a really good way to communicate about hurricanes. Because one thing, as I showed you that satellite picture earlier, we can sometimes have 4 or 5 hurricanes across the Atlantic at once. And it was really hard to get people to understand what hurricane we were talking about. You could say the hurricane here or the hurricane there. So it was discovered that if we give them names, which really officially started in the 1950s, that people could understand which hurricane we were talking about and relate better to it.
Great. Now, Cullum asked this question, but we've gotten sort of a couple of questions about the eye of the hurricane. He's wondering how big the eye is. And I know several folks have asked if you've actually, or the hurricane hunters have flown through the eye. Does that mean you go through the eye wall? And then, how long are you in that sunny spot that you were showing us?
Sure. So great question, Colin, and others that have asked. So the eye varies in size a lot. The smaller hurricanes they're a few miles, so maybe 3 or 4 miles across. But some of the really big hurricanes, like Hurricane Sandy I showed you earlier, the eye was about 50 miles across. So you could imagine it could be the size of a city, or it could be the size of a county or something like that. It all depends on the hurricane itself. Now, for the smaller ones, the hurricane hunters could be in the eye just for 5 or 10 minutes, and they absolutely would have to go through the eye wall before it and after it. But for the bigger ones, when they're 50 miles across, they could be in the eye for 20 or 30 minutes. It all depends. And every time they're in the eye, we ask them at the Hurricane Center if they will drop an instrument called a dropson into it so we can actually see what's happening inside the eye.
Great. Okay, a couple of other questions here. I like to ask this question, so thank you, Duncan, for bringing it up. So Duncan asks, how did you get into your job? That's always interesting for the kids to hear.
Sure, Duncan. So I got interested in around 4th grade. And I think I mentioned earlier, I grew up in New York City. So I wasn't really interested in hurricanes, even though they do get hurricanes in New York and portions of New England. I was way more interested in snowstorms. And I remember, Duncan, that I just really wanted to get off from school. And I realized, like, well, what could get me off from school? Oh, yeah, a winter storm or a blizzard. So I just wanted to learn about how they worked. And then I got fascinated by them. And then I just wanted to learn more and more and more. I was I thought weather was amazing. I still think it's amazing. But when I moved to South Florida for college and got affected by hurricanes, then I thought, oh my God, these are really cool. So after that, I just knew I wanted to stay in hurricanes. But yeah, it was probably initially the blizzards when I lived in New York City.
Great. Okay, so I think this is a pretty interesting question that someone was asking that I think has come up before. So what's the difference between a hurricane, a typhoon, a cyclone, other than where they're located? Is there a difference in those storms, or are they just different names for the same kind of storm in different geographic locations?
You got it, Grace. There's no difference besides for their names and geographic locations. Just like, you can think of it this way. In some parts of the US, we have different names for different things. I heard Grace earlier call it a semi-truck. Where I grew up in New York, we called it a tractor trailer. We were kind of referring to the same thing, but giving them different names. It works the same way here. They're the same animal, everybody, just different names for different regions.
Speaking of names, and I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway, can a storm be named the same thing? So, for example, could we have a second Hurricane Katrina?
Great question. Now, the truth is, yes, hurricanes can be given the same name. Here's how it works. The names actually repeat every 6 years. So the names we're using in 2020 were used in 2014. But the difference is, if the storm was so damaging, like Hurricane Harvey I showed you before, or Hurricane Katrina, or Hurricane Dorian last year, or you can think of many different hurricanes, Sandy I showed earlier, we then retire that name and come up with a name replacement. So if the storm produces a lot of damage or killed a lot of people, we retire the name for sensitivity reasons and then replace it with a new name. And we do that through the World Meteorological Organization and work with countries across the entire hurricane region. That's kind of how it works.
Now, and this, I would love to add this to the website if you have a link, John. A lot of kids are asking if there have been storms named after them. So they're giving me their name and saying, was there a storm? So is there a place where they can go and look up what storms, what names they've had and maybe how much damage they've done? And if there is, would you mind sending it to me to put on the NOAA Live website?
I will do that for you, Grace, so the kids can access it. It actually is a sublink within hurricanes.gov. So I'll send you a direct link so that they don't have to go hunting on that webpage.
That would be fantastic. Okay, I think we'll just end with one or two more questions. And so one of the questions that they asked is, what's the most exciting storm that you've ever worked?
Okay, sure. I'm gonna say Hurricane Irma, which was in 2017. Actually, it's a tie. I'm gonna tell you why quickly. So Hurricane Irma was a storm that affected Florida. It actually made landfall a little west of where I live. It was a Category 3 hurricane. The reason it was exciting was myself and all of my colleagues were on lockdown at the National Hurricane Center, meaning we could not leave the center because we were needed to work around the clock and because it was a threat to our area. So it was exciting because I was just constantly working and I was constantly worried about my family. It's a moment I'll never forget. I was working actually overnight and I had to try to find a place to sleep at the Hurricane Center, which we don't have beds. So I actually found a storage closet and slept in that closet after my shift ended. So I'll never forget it. Second place, or kind of tied for first place, was Hurricane Rita in 2005. The reason I remember that one so well is that was the time I got to fly into a hurricane. And when I flew through it, it was actually a Category 5 hurricane. And even though I got very, very sick on board and I'll never do it again, it was an experience I'll never, ever forget.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. I'm going to ask you one more question, and I'm just going to say, John, that you're so knowledgeable. I could just keep asking you questions all day. The kids have a lot, but I'll just be aware of our time. So one last question that came in was about storm surge that I wanted to share with you. And so they were asking how storm surge, if it's more likely if you live within a flood zone that storm surge is going to reach your house and do damage. So I think some folks, especially because we're on Cape Cod, some folks live within the flood zone. Does that put them more at risk during a hurricane?
Great question. So if you live in a coastal flood zone like Cape Cod, then absolutely. Think of it this way. The water in the ocean, right? It's going to be pushed by the wind. So that water is going to go somewhere. But if you live along the beach or very close to the beach, or if you could see the beach, you're at a high risk. But let's say you can't see the beach, but there's a smaller body of water pretty close to your house, and sometimes that water gets spilled out like canals or rivers or lakes. You know what's crazy? If you live close to the ocean and you're near a lake or a canal, that ocean water can work its way through the canals and the lakes and still flood your area. So if you live in a flood zone, especially near the coast, you may be told to evacuate because of your risk. The bottom line is you don't have to guess. If you're in an evacuation zone, we have a whole bunch of experienced people around the country that will call for the evacuations if we're worried about your area.
Great. Well, thanks for answering all our questions. I think I know I speak for all of the attendees that you are very knowledgeable, and it was wonderful to kick off this hurricane preparedness week by hearing from a hurricane expert and also getting great resources so that we can be prepared as this hurricane season starts. June 1st is when our season officially starts, right? So thank you to all of the attendees for attending. Just as a reminder, we have been recording the webinar and it will go up on our NOAA Live website probably later today, and our Spanish and English subtitles will be a little bit later, but they will also be added to the webinar. Just as a reminder, you can tune in Wednesday. Our next webinar will be on corals, and it's going to be very exciting. So you can tune in on Wednesday or look at our whole list of webinars on the NOAA Live website to see which ones interest you and tune in. Also, John made reference to several things that we've heard about in previous webinars as well. So if you want to learn more about what he shared, you can look for the one that was we have had other National Weather Service folks on. We've had someone talking about satellites. We've had our hurricane hunter. So if you were intrigued or interested, I encourage you to look back at some of our other webinars as well. But thanks so much for tuning in. John, thanks for your time. And everyone have a great day, and I'll see you Wednesday.